The sun was bright that afternoon, the kind of golden warmth that made the marble of the old family estate shimmer like a memory you weren't sure you wanted to keep. Every year, the Calderons hosted a grand family reunion on the first Sunday of May, a tradition older than most of the people attending. But this year was different. This year, it wasn't just about food or laughter or obligatory small talk. This year, the Calderons were unveiling something special. The family tree, the invitations had arrived months ago, embossed with gold lettering and a note that said, "You are part of our history. Come celebrate it." I almost didn't go. After years of being treated like the black sheep, the one who left, who didn't follow the Calderon way, the thought of walking into that mansion made my stomach twist. But curiosity, or maybe pride, won. If they were celebrating family, I wanted to see what that word still meant to them. As I drove up the long, tree-lined driveway, I could already hear the chatter. Laughter spilled from the garden, where long tables were set under white canopies and glass chandeliers hung from oak branches. My relatives moved like parts of a single, loud organism, hugging, gossiping, posing for photos beside ice sculptures of the Calderon crest. I walked in unnoticed at first, which was fine by me. It gave me time to observe. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of event designed to show the world that the Calderons were still untouchable, still rich, still powerful, still together. I spotted my cousin Marcus boasting about his new company. Aunt Lillian clutching pearls as she gossiped about who'd gained weight. And my mother pretending she hadn't seen me yet. Then the hush came. My Uncle Henry, the self-appointed head of the family after my grandfather's passing, took the stage near the large mural draped with velvet cloth. Behind him stood a tall oak structure covered in vines and golden frames, the much-anticipated family tree. "Today," he announced proudly, "we honor our roots to 115 members of the Calderon legacy, each a branch of this great tree. We are the result of hard work, loyalty, and unity." Applause echoed. Cameras flashed. Then, with a dramatic tug, he unveiled it. It was breathtaking, an enormous canvas painted with curling gold branches stretching toward the ceiling. Each branch bore tiny framed portraits and hand-lettered names in elegant script. My eyes scanned the familiar faces, my parents, cousins, even second cousins I hadn't seen in decades. My heartbeat quickened as I followed the line that should have led to me. It ended abruptly. My name wasn't there. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe my branch had been covered or overlooked. I leaned closer, tracing the lines again. My parents' names flowed into my brother's, then stopped, leaving an empty space where mine should have been. The air around me seemed to thicken. Behind me, a few relatives whispered. I caught Marcus's smirk. My mother looked away, pretending to admire the painting's detail. Uncle Henry cleared his throat. "Of course," he said, glancing briefly in my direction. "Some branches naturally prune themselves over time." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. I stood frozen, a polite smile plastered on my face, though inside I was shaking. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message. A declaration that I no longer belonged. But as I stared at that sprawling golden tree, something else stirred inside me, not shame, not sadness, but something colder, determined. They thought they could rewrite history by removing one name. They didn't realize they'd just started a story they'd wish they never had, because if there were 115 names on that tree and not mine, that was their biggest mistake. That night after the reunion, I sat in my car for a long time before driving away from the Calderon estate. The laughter and chatter from the garden still echoed faintly behind me, muffled by the closed windows. My reflection stared back from the windshield, expressionless, quiet, almost detached. I hadn't cried. I thought I would, but I didn't. Maybe you can't grieve something you lost years ago. The truth was, I'd been the outcast long before they left my name off that tree. That mural was just the final signature on a verdict they'd written long ago, when I was younger. My grandfather used to say that every Calderon was born with a duty to preserve the family name and grow its fortune. Most of my relatives took that literally. They joined the family's chain of businesses, real estate, wineries, shipping, you name it. I, however, wanted something simpler, quieter, something that didn't require family meetings disguised as power plays. I chose art. I remember the day I told them I'd been accepted into a design program in another city. My mother pursed her lips like I'd confessed to a crime. Uncle Henry laughed outright and said, "That's cute." A Calderon painting pictures while the rest of us build empires. Even my father, usually gentle, had looked disappointed. "We built this name for you," he said. "Don't waste it chasing colors." So I left. Not in anger, not yet, but with the naive hope that distance would soften their judgments. I still called home. I still sent postcards. I even attended my grandfather's birthday dinners when I could. But slowly, the calls stopped coming. The family chat group forgot to include me in updates. When my grandmother passed away, I wasn't even told until the funeral had already happened. That was the first time. I realized I wasn't just distant, I was being erased. Still, my grandfather had never turned his back on me. He would write me letters in his neat, slanted handwriting, always signing off with "Keep creating." The world needs color, even if our family doesn't understand it. Those letters became my anchor. After his passing, I framed the last one, dated just 2 weeks before he died, and then came the rumors, whispers that his will had been adjusted, that certain names had shifted. But I was too numb then to question it. I assumed I wouldn't be included anyway. It wasn't until that day, staring at the golden tree, missing one branch, that everything clicked. They hadn't just erased me from the mural. They'd erased me from the story, from the records, the inheritance, the family narrative, because in their minds, being a Calderon wasn't about blood, it was about loyalty. And loyalty meant obedience. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't bitter anymore. I had built my own life, small, maybe, but mine. A life full of clients who valued my creativity, friends who saw me, and a studio where my paintings breathed instead of suffocating under a family name. Yet, as I drove away that night, something shifted inside me. I realized it wasn't about money or status. It was about truth, the truth my grandfather believed in. The one they buried with his name and locked behind legal papers. They could call me an outcast all they wanted. They could paint 100 trees without me. But roots run deeper than ink, and mine still reached back to that house, to that family, to the secrets they thought I'd never find, and for the first time in years, I wasn't running from the Calderons. I was coming back for them. A week after the reunion, the whispers started. They always did. Eventually, the Calderons couldn't keep a secret longer than it took to pour a glass of champagne. But this time, the gossip wasn't about who wore what or which cousin was divorcing. It was about money, specifically grandfather's estate. I first heard it through my cousin Elena, one of the few relatives who still texted me occasionally, though mostly out of curiosity, not kindness. "Big news," she messaged. "Uncle Henry's talking about dividing the estate. Says he's finalizing some trust paperwork soon. You probably don't care, but it's getting messy." Messy, that word hung in my mind. The Calderons never got messy, at least not publicly. If things were leaking out now, it meant something was wrong. That night, I dug out the old wooden box where I kept my grandfather's letters. The paper had yellowed at the edges, the ink faint but steady. I read them all again, front to back, trying to find any clue that might tell me what he really wanted for his estate. In one of the final letters, a line stood out, something I'd skimmed past before. "If one branch strays from the tree, remember that the roots still feed it. The family trust is built for all of you, not just the ones who claim to own it." It didn't sound like a man planning to exclude anyone. It sounded like someone trying to protect something or someone from being taken over. The next day, I called Elena. "Who's handling the estate now?" I asked casually. She hesitated. "Uncle Henry, mostly. But he's working with Mr. Sloan, grandfather's old lawyer." "Mr. Sloan retired 2 years ago," I said. "That's what I thought," she replied, lowering her voice. "But Henry said Sloan came back just to finalize things." The line went silent for a moment before she added, "Look, I probably shouldn't say this, But some people think Henry pressured grandfather to change the trust before he passed. You didn't hear that from me. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The quiet between us said everything. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed images of my grandfather sitting in his study, the faint smell of cedar and pipe smoke, his hand resting on the old family ledger. He'd been a man of principle, but he'd also been surrounded by people who saw him as a signature, not a soul, and Uncle Henry. He'd always been ambitious, the kind of man who smiled like a politician and never did anything without an angle. It wouldn't have been difficult for him to convince a frail old man to sign new documents in the final months. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I drove back to town and stopped outside the old Calderon law offices, the same building where my grandfather had handled every family contract for 40 years. The sign read, Sloan and Partners, Estate and Trust Management. I didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist looked too nervous to argue when I said, I'm a Calderon. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and coffee. On the walls hung certificates, but one thing was missing: Sloan himself. A younger man in a Navy suit appeared, introducing himself as Mr. Vance, the new managing partner. When I mentioned my grandfather's estate, his smile stiffened. All inquiries are being handled directly by Mr. Henry Calderon, he said quickly. The documents are sealed pending internal review. Internal review? I repeated. By whom? He didn't answer. He just adjusted his tie and muttered, Family matters can be delicate. That's when I knew. Something was wrong, badly wrong. And if there was a revised will? It wasn't revised by choice. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I caught my reflection in the glass door, the same calm expression I'd worn at the reunion. But this time there was something new behind it. Determination. If they thought I'd disappear quietly again, they'd forgotten who I got my stubbornness from. My grandfather may have built the Calderon legacy, but I was about to uncover the truth that could bring it crashing down. The decision to go back wasn't dramatic. There was no tearful packing or grand declaration. I simply woke up one morning, looked around my small apartment in the city, the unfinished paintings, the dried coffee cups, the walls that had heard me mutter to myself for years, and realized I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. So I packed a few things, locked the door, and drove home. The Calderon estate sat on the outskirts of Crestwood, a town that had grown in every direction except toward that old house. It was as if even progress knew better than to trespass on the Calderon's pride. The mansion, with its columns and ivy-covered walls, looked almost unchanged since my childhood. But the town around it felt smaller, quieter, as if time had thinned it out. I didn't go back to the mansion, not right away. Instead, I rented a small cottage 2 miles down the road, just past the orchard my grandfather used to take me to as a girl. The property was old, slightly crooked, with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under my footsteps, but it had a clear view of the estate from the hill. It was perfect. I didn't tell anyone I'd returned. The fewer who knew, the better. For days I kept to myself, painting, walking the old trails, pretending I wasn't watching. But in truth, I was taking notes. Cars came and went from the estate more frequently than before. Expensive ones, too. The family accountant's BMW, Uncle Henry's black Mercedes, and more recently a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Once, while driving past the gates, I slowed down and caught a glimpse of my cousin Marcus standing on the balcony, shouting into his phone. Even from a distance, his gestures were wild, angry. The Calderons had always kept their tempers behind closed doors. Seeing one crack open in broad daylight told me something was unraveling. By the third week, I finally crossed paths with someone from the family. My mother. I saw her at the farmer's market downtown, inspecting tomatoes like they were jewels. I almost turned away, but she noticed me first. Her face froze for a second, shock, then disapproval, then something softer that she tried to hide. Clara, she said, her voice quiet but steady. You're back. Just for a while, I replied. I needed some time away from the city. Her eyes flickered. She knew there was more to it, but she didn't ask. Calderons rarely ask questions they didn't want answers to. Your uncle's been busy, she said after a pause. Handling things your grandfather left behind. It's been stressful. Stressful, I repeated. Because of the estate? She hesitated, then nodded. There's been confusion about the trust. Some missing paperwork. It's complicated. Missing paperwork. That was the polite Calderon way of saying someone's hiding something. I almost told her what I knew, that I'd been to Sloane's office, that I'd heard whispers of revisions and signatures that didn't match. But then I saw the faint tremor in her hands as she reached for her purse. My mother wasn't innocent, but she wasn't cruel either. She'd always chosen silence over conflict. And maybe that was how she'd survived this long. Just don't get involved, she said softly. Please, Clara, it's not worth reopening old wounds. But as I watched her walk away, her pearls glinting under the afternoon sun, I realized something. The wound had never healed. They'd just covered it with gold paint and called it tradition that night. Back at the cottage, I stood by the window and looked toward the estate. A light was on in my grandfather's old study, the one room. No one was supposed to enter after his death. Someone was in there, and I wasn't going to rest until I found out who. It was the light in my grandfather's study that drew me back to the estate that night. A single lamp burning through the window, faint and steady, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. I waited until the clock struck midnight, when even the orchard was asleep and the sound of crickets filled the air. Then I slipped into my car, drove down the hill, and parked just beyond the main gate. The security cameras hadn't changed in years, the same blind spots. My cousins used to sneak out through as teenagers still existed. Some traditions never die. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound slicing through the stillness. The mansion loomed ahead, majestic and hollow, every shadow carrying a memory. My pulse quickened. I wasn't supposed to be here, not since the night of the reunion. But something told me my grandfather wouldn't have minded. I slipped around to the back entrance, the one that led straight into the library. The door was locked, but the key was still hidden beneath the third brick of the back steps, exactly where grandfather always kept it. They'd changed the locks to the front doors, but never thought to check here. Typical Calderon arrogance. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and faint tobacco, just like it always had. The hallways were lined with portraits, eyes that followed you wherever you walked. I ignored them and made my way to the study. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the lamp was still on, casting a soft amber glow across the desk. But the room was empty. The desk looked different, neater, almost staged. But the painting above it, the one of my grandfather as a young man, caught my eye. As a child, I'd seen him open a hidden panel behind it once, where he stored private papers. My hand trembled as I lifted the frame slightly and felt for the latch. A faint click. The panel opened. Inside was a small compartment, dusty but intact. A few envelopes, a leather-bound notebook, and one sealed folder labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Calderon Family Trust, original draft. My breath hitched. I pulled it out carefully, my heart pounding, and laid it open on the desk. The first page was dated 2 years before his death. Every line of the document was written with the same careful precision that characterized him, deliberate, fair, and unambiguous. And there, halfway down the page, my name appeared in black ink. Clara Calderon, appointed co-trustee and equal beneficiary. My vision blurred for a second. After all the humiliation, the erasure, the lies, he had never forgotten me. He'd made sure I was part of the family trust. It was all here, legal, signed, witness. Then I noticed something else. A second signature on the last page, dated just 3 months before his death. It looked wrong, slanted, uneven, and beneath it, a faint line in different handwriting. Revised by instruction of H. Calderon, March 16, 20. Uncle Henry. I compared the two signatures. One was steady and firm, my grandfather's hand. The other trembled, uneven, and almost forced. I knew his handwriting. I'd studied it for years through his letters. He didn't write like that unless he was sick or pressured. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. "Who's there?" I whispered, turning. No one answered. Just silence, and the faint hum of the old clock in the hallway. I quickly stuffed the folder and notebook into my bag. shut the compartment, and slipped out of the room. My footsteps were almost soundless against the carpet, but my heart pounded loud enough to betray me. By the time I reached the back door, headlights flashed across the yard. A car pulling up, Uncle Henry's black Mercedes. I didn't look back. I darted into the trees, my bag clutched tight, and didn't stop running until the mansion was just a shadow behind me when I finally reached my car. Breathless and shaking, I opened the folder again to make sure it was real. It was Dot. My name was there. My place in the family was there. And now I had proof that they'd stolen both. The night I took the folder from my grandfather's study, sleep became a luxury. My mind raced like a storm, flashes of ink, signatures, dates, and that one crooked line that didn't belong. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my uncle's name under the words, revised by instruction. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront anyone, not yet. If the Calderons had taught me anything, it was that truth without proof was just noise. And in that family, noise got buried fast. I started small. I scanned every page of the original trust on my laptop, saving multiple backups, one on a flash drive, one on cloud storage, one hidden in a painting's frame. If my uncle had forged documents once, he'd do it again to protect himself. I wasn't going to give him that chance. Then I made a call I'd been avoiding. Mr. Sloane's old assistant. Deborah Chase had worked at the Calderon law firm for nearly 20 years before she left, quietly, and under strange circumstances. Rumor was she and Uncle Henry hadn't parted on good terms. It took me 3 days to track her down through a mutual contact. She now lived 2 towns over, running a small stationery shop. When I walked in, she recognized my last name immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're a Calderon," she said, like it was both a fact and a warning. "I was," I replied. "Maybe still am, depending on which version of the story you believe." She gave a faint smile at that. "I always liked your grandfather," she said softly. "He was fair, honest, the kind of man who still read every page before signing his name." "That's why I'm here," I said, lowering my voice. "I found an earlier version of his will, one that lists me as co-trustee. The final one doesn't. I think someone changed it." "After he got sick?" Her eyes sharpened instantly. "Do you have copies?" I slid the folder onto the counter. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and walked to the door, flipping the sign to closed. When she returned, her tone had shifted from polite curiosity to quiet urgency. "You're not wrong," she said. "I remember your grandfather's final weeks. Mr. Sloane was already retired. But Henry insisted on using the firm's letterhead to make the revisions. He brought in a notary I'd never seen before, someone who didn't usually handle high-value documents. The whole thing felt rushed, so it was changed." I asked. She nodded. "I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did." "And you're right, your name was in the original draft?" "He wanted you as trustee. He even said, 'Clara sees things clearly. She won't let them fight over it.'" My throat tightened. Hearing that, her quoting him, felt like a ghost reaching out to remind me I hadn't imagined his faith in me. "Do you have any records?" I asked. "Emails, notes, anything?" Deborah hesitated. "After I left, I kept a few things for my own protection. I can't give them to you outright, but I can show you something." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a manila folder. Inside were 2 scanned pages, the notarization log and a receipt for the revised will. The notary's signature was there, but the date didn't match the revision date on my grandfather's copy. It was off by 5 days. "That's illegal," I murmured. "It's forgery," she said flatly. "And your uncle knows it." We stood in silence for a long moment, the air heavy with understanding. Then she slid the copies across the counter. "Take these," she said. "But be careful. The Calderons protect their image at any cost." As I walked out of her shop, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the street like paper. I clutched the documents close. I finally had proof, small but real. Enough to shake the roots of that golden family tree. That night, I sat in my cottage, looking out toward the estate's faint outline against the dark horizon. They'd taken my name off that tree to erase me. Now I was ready to carve it back, with truth sharper than any blade they'd ever used. By the time the invitation arrived, I already knew what it meant. Thick ivory paper, embossed in gold, the Calderon signature style. The letter read, "You are cordially invited to the Calderon Heritage Dinner, honoring the future of our family legacy." It wasn't addressed directly to me. The envelope was marked Current Beneficiaries. Yet somehow it ended up in my mailbox, a mistake? Maybe, but I'd stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. I held the letter under the lamplight, the gold lettering glinting like irony. They had erased me from the tree, rewritten the will, and forged documents, and now they were inviting me to celebrate the future. They'd stolen. It felt poetic. I decided to go, the night of the dinner. The Calderon mansion looked like something out of a magazine spread, candlelight spilling from the windows. Laughter echoing from the courtyard, a string quartet playing softly near the fountain. From the outside it was perfect. From the inside I knew it was hollow. I wore black. Not mourning, power. A quiet reminder that I wasn't here to blend in. When I arrived at the entrance, the doorman hesitated, checking his list twice before finally stepping aside. "Welcome, Miss Calderon," he said awkwardly, as if the name itself made him uncertain. Inside, every head turned. Conversation stilled. Forks paused mid. My mother was the first to recover, forcing a polite smile. "Clara," she said tightly, "you came." "I was invited," I said simply, holding up the card. "Apparently I'm still family after all." Uncle Henry's expression hardened. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth. "Everyone's welcome tonight. We're celebrating legacy, not differences." The lie rolled off his tongue like silk. I spent the evening quietly observing. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that only money and pride could create. My cousins laughed too loudly. The wine flowed a little too freely. And at the head table, a thick binder lay beside Uncle Henry's plate, the estate documents, neatly arranged for display. As dessert was served, he rose, tapping his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight marks the official confirmation of our family trust restructuring, the beginning of a new chapter for the Calderon name." Applause. Cameras flashed. He opened the binder, revealing a printed document stamped with the family seal. "Our grandfather's legacy has been consolidated," he continued. "Each branch represented, each contribution honored. Each branch, except mine." My mother looked at her lap. My brother stared at the ceiling. No one dared to meet my eyes. I waited until the room had quieted again before standing. The movement drew attention like a match in darkness. "Before you go any further," I said calmly, "you might want to make sure you're reading the right version." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Uncle Henry blinked. "Excuse me?" I stepped forward, pulling a small folder from my bag, the one I'd carried for weeks. "This," I said, placing it on the table beside his binder, "is my grandfather's original trust. Signed, sealed, and notarized. The version before you decided to make revisions." Gasps broke out. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Henry tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "I don't know what kind of stunt this is." "It's not a stunt," I interrupted. "It's proof. Your notary log was falsified. The dates don't match. The assistant who witnessed it remembers what really happened, and I have her statement." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence did the work for me. Across the table, Marcus muttered, "She's bluffing." But his eyes betrayed him. They darted toward the binder like a guilty reflex. I looked around the room at the same faces that had laughed when they saw my name missing from the family tree. "Well," I said softly, "you were right about one thing. I wasn't part of your version of the Calderon legacy." Then I looked straight at Henry. "But your version ends tonight." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint clinking of wine glasses and the soft hum of the chandelier overhead. Every eye was fixed on me, some shocked, others furious, and a few, I think, quietly relieved. The Calderons had built their legacy on silence, but tonight, silence was about to break. Uncle Henry was the first to recover. "Clara," he said smoothly, forcing a chuckle, "you're mistaken. These matters are Complicated. Legal documents go through many drafts. Then maybe you should have checked your handwriting, I said evenly. He froze. I slid the folder toward him, the papers spilling out like a confession. This is grandfather's signature, I said, tapping one page. And this one, I lifted another sheet, the so-called revision, is yours. Same slant, same ink, same hesitation marked near the capital C. You didn't revise anything with him. You revised it for him after he died. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped a fork. My brother muttered a curse under his breath. Uncle Henry's face drained of color, but he kept his composure, though the tremor in his hand betrayed him. You have no idea what you're implying, he hissed. Oh, I know exactly what I'm implying, I said. And so will the courts. Deborah Chase, your former paralegal, gave me the notarization logs. The dates don't match. The witness signatures are missing. And she remembers you showing up with a half-finished draft, demanding it be backdated for convenience. Murmurs filled the room again, louder this time, sharper. Cousin Marcus stood, trying to intervene. Maybe we should all calm down. Sit down, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his. You've known for years, haven't you? You just didn't think anyone would call you on it. He sank back, cheeks flushed. Uncle Henry tried one last time to salvage control. Even if what you're saying were true, it changes nothing. The trust is finalized. The assets are divided. There's no going back. That's when I smiled, small but certain. That's where you're wrong. From my bag, I pulled a flash drive and set it on the table. Every document, every email, every forged revision, all backed up and time-stamped. Already copied to my lawyer. Already sent to the probate office. The room went still. This family loves legacy, I continued softly. But legacy isn't built on theft. It's built on truth. And the truth is, grandfather didn't leave this empire to the loudest or the greediest. He left it to the one person he trusted to protect it, me. I turned to my mother. Her eyes were glassy, torn between pride and fear. For the first time in years, she didn't look disappointed. She looked freed. Then I faced Henry again. You tried to erase me from the tree. But what you didn't understand is, you can't cut off a branch that holds the roots. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The weight of everyone's stares crushed him into silence. Slowly, I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and turned to leave. I didn't need to stay for the fallout. I'd already won. The truth was out, and like wildfire, it would consume everything they'd built on lies. As I reached the doorway, Uncle Henry finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You'll regret this? I paused, glancing back at him. Maybe, I said quietly, but you'll regret it more. Then I walked out, my heels echoing against the marble, each step heavier than victory, lighter than vengeance. Outside, the night air was cool and still. For the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of their shadow. The house behind me glowed like a golden tomb, beautiful but empty. They had tried to bury me with their greed. Instead, I'd buried their lies. The news spread faster than I ever imagined. By morning, whispers had turned into headlines. Calderon Estate under investigation for fraudulent trust alterations. Family feud erupts over multi-million-dollar legacy. Every business paper, every local site, they all had the same photo, my uncle, stiff and gray-faced, leaving the courthouse while reporters swarmed him for a family that prided itself on discretion. This was their worst nightmare. I didn't speak to anyone for days. My phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists, distant cousins pretending to care. Old friends who suddenly always believed in me. I ignored them all. Instead, I drove to the small house I'd been living in for years, the one no one in the family had ever bothered to visit. The silence there was clean, real, not like the muffled, manicured quiet of the mansion, but even in peace. The past has a way of knocking. 3 days after the dinner, my mother showed up. She didn't call first. She never did. When I opened the door, she stood on the porch holding a bouquet of white lilac, the kind she used to place at my grandfather's grave every spring. Can I come in? She asked softly. I nodded. Inside, she sat at the edge of the couch. her posture still perfect, like she didn't know how to be anything but composed. "They'd been calling me nonstop," she said after a long silence. "Your uncle, the lawyers, everyone?" "I figured," I said, setting down 2 cups of tea. "They're panicking." She hesitated, tracing the rim of her cup. "You really did it. You actually exposed them." "They exposed themselves," I said quietly. "I just gave them a mirror." Her lips trembled, not from anger, but from something else. "Regret, maybe?" "You have to understand," she said. "Back then, when they cut your name from the trust, I couldn't fight them. Henry held everything. He controlled the accounts, the board, even the lawyers. I wanted to protect you, but—" I interrupted her gently. "I know, you were scared." Tears welled in her eyes. I was ashamed. For the first time she looked small, not the cold, polished woman I'd grown up fearing, but someone fragile, human. "You don't have to be anymore," I said. "It's over." She looked up at me, searching my face. "Is it?" I didn't answer, because part of me knew she was right. It wasn't over. It was only changing shape over the next few weeks. The Calderon Empire began to unravel. The family trust was frozen pending investigation. Uncle Henry stepped down from the board for health reasons. Marcus disappeared from public view after deleting every social media account he had. The estate, the same mansion that had once felt untouchable, now stood half empty, with staff whispering about layoffs and audits, but the real fallout wasn't financial. It was personal. Cousins stopped talking to cousins. Secrets surfaced like oil and water, old betrayals, hidden debts, rewritten stories. The Calderon name, once a symbol of power, became synonymous with deceit, and me? I became the scapegoat and the savior. Some called me brave. Others called me vindictive. Both were true, but I didn't care what they thought anymore. I spent my days rebuilding what mattered, not their empire, but my own peace. I met with lawyers, revised the trust to restore what my grandfather intended, and made sure every record was protected this time. One afternoon, as I reviewed the documents, I found a letter tucked between the pages, one my grandfather had written years before he died. It was addressed simply to my granddaughter, Clara, the one who sees what others ignore. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. Legacy is not what we leave behind in money. It's what we leave behind in truth. For the first time I smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. They had erased my name from the family tree once. Now, every branch that remained had to bend around mine. It took months for the dust to settle. By the end of that year, the Calderon name had gone from a symbol of prestige to a cautionary tale whispered in business circles. The investigations were still ongoing, but the truth was already out in the open, and the damage was irreversible. The Calderon family estate, once sprawling with luxury and laughter, now felt like a mausoleum of ambition. The portraits in the grand hallway, generations of solemn faces staring down, seemed heavier now, as if they too bore the shame of what their descendants had done. But for me, the chaos had become strangely quiet. When the courts finally reinstated my rightful share of the trust, I didn't feel the rush of victory I expected. No fireworks. No satisfaction in the numbers written on the papers. Just a calm, almost fragile understanding. This was never really about money. It was about being seen. One afternoon, I returned to the mansion for the first time since that dinner, not as an outsider, but as the rightful heir. The air was still thick with old memories. I walked through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the cool marble banister, the carved initials my brother and I had etched into the staircase when we were kids. In the library, I found the family tree still hanging above the fireplace. A massive oak illustration, each branch carrying the weight of a name. And there, just beneath my mother's name, was an empty space, the space where mine had once been. I stared at it for a long time. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the outline of my erased name still showed faintly. Like a scar, I could have restored it myself, written it back in bold ink. But instead I called the archivist who managed the family records. When he arrived, I handed him the original trust papers, properly notarized and sealed. Update the records, I said. But don't just add me back. He blinked, confused. Then what would you like us to do? Leave this version as is, I said, glancing back at the faded tree, and commission a new one. From the beginning. Every name truthful this time. He nodded slowly, understanding it wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about rewriting the story, not just mine, but all of it. The real family tree, the one built on truth, not vanity. Weeks later, the new tree arrived. It was carved from dark walnut wood, the names engraved by hand. And for the first time, I saw it not as a record of lineage, but as a map, a story of choices, consequences, and courage. My name sat quietly among them, not larger or bolder than the rest, but finally there, that night, I hosted a small gathering, not a grand dinner, not a press event, just a few people who had stood by me when everyone else turned away. My lawyer, my mother, a couple of old friends. We sat under the same chandelier that once gleamed over false toasts and hollow promises. No speeches. No performances. Just laughter, the kind that didn't need to hide. As the evening faded, I walked to the garden. The moonlight fell over the trees, casting long shadows on the stone path. My grandfather used to say that family trees weren't meant to be perfect, that storms prune them, winds bend them, but the roots always hold. I finally understood. The Calderons had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they revealed themselves. Their biggest mistake wasn't cutting me out, it was underestimating what grows back stronger after being cut down. I looked up at the stars, the branches swaying softly above me, and whispered a quiet promise to the man who had believed in me first. The truth has your name on it, Grandpa. And now, so does mine. And for the first time, I felt it, not revenge, not triumph, just belonging.